Night descends faster these days, and cold winds pick up. Shadows stir on the walls, and unknown eyes stare out from the darkness. Spooky season has come, Halloween approaches. The perfect time for the second episode of The Graveyard Shift. Now then, my little trick-or-treaters. A few weeks ago I travelled to the beautiful country of Scotland. Hiking through steep valleys, climbing and traversing my way through the highlands, exploring cities and towns that are drenched in rich history and culture, finished off with a steamy bowl of Cullen's King and a whisky nightcap. Oh, wee laddies, it's all quite a sight to behold. But this isn't a video to boost the tourism in Scotland. Or maybe it is, if the Scottish government makes a generous donation to the channel, perhaps. As the title of this video gives away, we are going to talk about an OG cryptid, and probably one of the most well-known ones worldwide. Found in the Scottish Highlands, there's a huge loch which is home to a certain monster. This infamous loch is called Loch Ness, and the beast said to roam its depths is aptly named the Loch Ness Monster, or in short, Nessie. Now all of this should be well-known information unless you've been living off the grid in the woods with a certain hairy primate. Nessie has become a household name, and the legend of the monster draws many to Loch Ness every year. And for good reason. Nessie has been around for literally ages. In fact, its first documented sighting was an early medieval legend set in AD 565, where Saint Columba, an Irish priest who would later become a saint, was visiting Scotland and apparently had a run-in with the Loch Ness Monster. In this tale, Nessie is described as a man-killing dragon that lived in the River Ness. But it was in the spring of 1933 that the world learned about the elusive creature said to roam the depths of Loch Ness. The Inverness Courier, a local newspaper, reported on the experience a couple had undergone while traveling along the lake's northwest edge. The sudden sight of an enormous animal rolling and plunging in the water made the couple stop their car to observe the spectacle for a few minutes. The newspaper referred to the observed object as a monster, and it did not take long for other newspapers to pick up the story. Coincidental, before the sighting, an older road running along the north end of the loch had been expanded through the use of dynamite. Construction workers also removed trees and other obstructions to clear a view of the water. The disturbances from the explosives and ability to clearly see the surface of Loch Ness while driving by seemed to be directly connected to a sudden rise of monster reports. About 6 months and 20 sightings later, the legend of the Loch Ness Monster was born, and the world was introduced to Nessie. People came forward with alleged sightings going back to the middle of the 19th century. Most sightings describe a large animal whose black or greyish back would rise out of the water resembling an overturned boat. Sometimes 3 humps would be seen, often paired with descriptions of a long thin neck and a small head with a horse-like appearance. All these different accounts of Nessie sightings have given birth to many theories about what sort of creature the monster might actually be. Most people are familiar with the depiction of the monster as a plesiosaurus, obviously derived from the reports describing a long neck with a small head attached to it. Loch Ness was formed 10,000 years ago, during the end of the last ice age, when glaciers melted and filled up the fjords they had created. Perhaps a few pleiosauruses were stuck frozen solid in a glacier and got released into the loch when their icy prison melted. Now I don't know how this works out concerning the time period these seafaring dinos existed or their geographical locations at the time. I'm not Dr. Alan Grant from Jurassic Park. There's also the question if any animal can survive being frozen for such extreme long periods of time. It's known some animals, mainly reptiles, can survive short periods of being frozen in the right circumstances, but as for literal decades, I think only unicellular organisms manage that. Oh, and eldritch horrors. Early chronicler Rupert T. Gould theorized the monster to be a stranded sea serpent, which reflects the so-called 3 humps sightings more. This has also been linked to the theory that instead of a plesiosaurus, it might be a Zeuglodon, also called a Basilosaurus, that roams the loch. These are basically prehistoric whales with a license to kill. A less fun theory that's been put forth by certain scientists conclude it might just be a really big eel. And yes, there's also another scientist theory that some sightings are whale dicks sticking out of the water, but I'm not gonna discuss whale dicks with you. You can Google that shit if you want. No judgment. The Loch Ness monster has been linked to many things such as a great salamander, a large alligator, or a crocodile. And the beast isn't always alone on its leisurely strolls on the water. Multiple eyewitnesses have claimed to see 2 or more creatures moving about in the loch, including what seemed to be a little Nessie following the bigger ones. Now that's just adorable, and it would make sense for there to be some sort of breeding ground. Otherwise the monster would have to be basically immortal. The obvious next step for the search for Nessie is to explore the murky depths of Loch Ness itself, which of course they did. Some interesting photographs were taken underwater in 1972 and 1975. During a patrol, a sonar-bearing boat tracked an unidentified object but lost it. Less than an hour later, 2 more objects were detected. The 2 targets, between 6 and 9 meters long, were right behind a school of fleeing salmon. The underwater camera of a companion vessel took some interesting shots during the encounters. 2 frames had what looked to be a flipper attached to a large body. A 3rd shot showed an out-of-focus image of 2 objects. Researchers returned to Ness in 1975, sponsored by the Massachusetts-based Academy of Applied Sciences, and managed to capture an even more impressive image. One shot shows something resembling an upper torso, neck and head. The next shot goes a bit wilder, showing a strange visage that could be a horse-like face with weird horn-like protrusions. Of course, these pictures, like most Nessie pictures, had a fair share of skeptics, and rightly so. As much as I want to believe in a mystical beast ruling the depths of Loch Ness, I also think it's important to have a skeptic side too. These pictures are far from concrete proof. Quite honestly, that so-called underwater face shot of Nessie looks funky as fuck, like a mutated giant snail that swam into a propeller of a boat. As cool as underwater shots are, it's fair to say it's usually the above water pictures and footage that speaks to people's imagination. One of the best pieces of photographic evidence is a film taken in 1960 by Tim Dinsdale, a very respected Nessie investigator. As he described it, he noticed a long oval shape while on a Nessie watch along the eastern shore, which suddenly started moving. He managed to film the shape for 4 minutes before it submerged. To validate his footage even more, Dinsdale also filmed a boat sailing in the same direction, and asked the Britain's Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre, aka JARIC, to analyze and compare both films to disprove the skeptic's argument that his first film was just a boat. JARIC concluded that the object in the first film was not a boat, but an animate object 4 to 5 meters long, moving at a speed of 16 kilometers per hour. So far, all these sightings took place on water or underwater, so it may come as a surprise that there have also been sightings of the Loch Ness monster on land. Land sightings are rare compared to the regular sightings of the monster vibing on the loch, but in 1960 a certain Colonel Fordyce made a testimony in which he writes about an encounter with a creature in 1932 while driving through the woods at the south edge of the loch. He offers a bizarre description of a strange beast that looked like a cross between a large horse and a camel, with a long neck, walking on long thin legs with a narrow hairy tail. Curiously enough, there have been multiple land sightings of a creature with this weirdly specific description. But it gets even more nutty. 2 other land sightings from 1923 and 1933 speak of people witnessing of something close to a gigantic hippopotamus. Other than that, the mainstream plesiosaurus-like Nessie has also been seen wandering through the woods along the loch. All in all, land sightings tend to make serious cryptozoologists a bit uneasy, mainly because they're a bit goofy, I guess. Whether or not a great beast stalks the waters of Loch Ness, the loch itself is a pretty interesting location as well. Loch Ness is about 36 kilometers long and 1.6 kilometers wide. At its deepest point, the loch is 226 meters deep. It's the second largest lake in Scotland after Loch Lomond. On that note, a nice bit of trivia is that Loch Ness has the biggest volume. In theory, the water of all the lakes and rivers in England and Wales would fit in Loch Ness. Another interesting nugget about the Loch Ness is its shape. The edges and walls of the loch are very steep, while the bottom is rather flat for a lake. To explain it in a tangible and simple way, you can compare Loch Ness to a giant bathtub. Just replace the plastic ducky with a giant monster. Due to this shape, the loch is capable of generating some dangerous waves during bad weather. The waters of the loch are very murky because a lot of peat from the hills ends up in the water. Besides being surrounded by woodland hills, there's also the crumbling remains of Castle Urquhart, which had seen its fair share of bloody battles and now stands as a lone relic of the past looking over the loch. A gigantic lake surrounded by hills, deep murky waters and an ancient castle, the perfect recipe to birth the legend of the Loch Ness Monster. But Loch Ness has its fair share of rarities besides resident cryptid. They may not have found Nessie yet in the deep, but they have found radioactive particles in the silt beneath the surface of Loch Ness. These are said to be leftovers of either Chernobyl, a nuclear bomb testing, or a Japanese nuclear disaster. More extreme theories about the presence of nuclear deposits in the loch involve impacting meteorites and emissions from UFOs or military stealth aircrafts. Luckily, there seems to be no danger to organic life forms. You won't grow an extra limb if you take a dip in Loch Ness. Not that you would take a dip in the cold murky waters for your pleasure, but accidents on lakes are not uncommon. But accidents with a jet engine powered speedboat are a bit less usual. Yet this is exactly what happened in 1952 when John Cobb tried to grab the world water speed record on Loch Ness with his jet-powered speedboat Crusader. During his attempt to break the record, his speedboat reached a speed of 320 km per hour before the vessel hit an unexplained wake in the water, destroying the Crusader and tossing John 46 meters away from the wreckage. As expected, there's also a theory connecting the Loch Ness Monster to the tragic accident, theorizing the mysterious wake was created by the monster trying to evade John Cobb's vessel. Of course, any occurrence on Loch Ness would circle back to Nessie in some way. Shall I make a bold claim designed to get your hopes up before tricking you to punish your gullible nature? Okay then. You can 100% find a Loch Ness Monster in the cold depths of the loch. No really, you can. It's right there, on the bottom, waiting. It's just not a living or organic specimen, but actually a 9 meters long model of the Loch Ness Monster made in 1969 for a Sherlock Holmes movie which sank in the loch during filming only to be rediscovered 50 years later. How's that for a nice dose of submechanophobia? As you can see, the loch has quite a legacy of its own, making it the perfect home for dear old Nessie. Whether you believe in the Loch Ness Monster or not, its legend has been drawing people from all over the world to take in the atmosphere of the imposing loch and its surroundings, also sparking a tourist attraction and piquing the interest of scientific and fantastical minds alike for many years to come.